banned in Russia, but I'm making it with the College Democrats of America at the convention here. So I'm thrilled to be with you guys. Quinn, thank you for that beautiful, soaring introduction. And welcome to the nation's capital, everybody. I see you've come from all over America. Wow. South Dakota and Arkansas and Georgia. And hello, everybody. And I wish we could be welcoming you to some better weather. I am like heady and dizzy just being outside for like 60 seconds, and you know, it's been a brutally hot summer, and now we got the smog and the wildfire dust coming in. On Capitol Hill, I like to say it's not the heat, it's the stupidity, and we got plenty of that too. To go around. But hey, I was thrilled to see that there were some Democracy Summer people here. Can I see where they are? Thank you guys for what you're doing. I mean, this is, I'll tell you the story of how like I started Democracy Summer. It's when I first got into politics. It was 20 years ago. I ran for the state Senate. And, you know, you got to start by organizing your family first. And so I was trying to get my 3 kids and like a dozen nieces and nephews who live in the neighborhood to come and volunteer on my campaign. And then my niece Maggie said, well, what are we going to do? Put on our resume that we worked for our uncle's losing state Senate campaign? And I said, Maggie, number one, we're not going to lose. We're going to win. And number two, you're not just working for my campaign. You're part of Democracy Summer. And she said, what's that? And then I had to make it up, you know, because I got her interested. I said, we're going to bring the greatest Democratic policy experts and organizers and elected officials and the best historians and constitutional law professors and voting rights activists to come and talk to you about why we're doing this, and you're going to be able to engage with them. Then you're going to go out and sweat it out in another Republican climate change summer, knocking on doors, registering voters, canvassing, and doing the hard work of bringing us Democratic victory, okay? And so, you know, this summer we got, you know, all of our favorites who've been working with us. Elizabeth Warren was there the other day. Sheldon Whitehouse was with us the other day. And we do it online, so we're connecting with young people across the country. We got like somewhere around 1,800 now who are working with us in Democracy Summer all across America. I believe we're in every state because we didn't have any elected officials from South Dakota in Congress, but I think we're doing it with the state party in South Dakota. I don't know if anybody's here from South Dakota, but you know, Heather Cox Richardson is there. Chairman Benny Thompson is part of it. AOC, you name it. Everybody's participating. And my co-chair is the youngest member of Congress, Maxwell Frost from Orlando, Florida. So anyway, I think it's fantastic what you guys are doing here. Like, amazing. I want to salute David Seaton, who is vice president for, I think, political organizing or something. And David, check this out, was a Democracy Summer Fellow in the 6th District of Massachusetts, the North Shore of Massachusetts, where he grew up. He was working with Seth Moulton. And through Democracy Summer, he threw himself into the Democratic Party, and he got elected as a delegate to the Democratic National Convention in 2024. And this guy, like I'm sure everybody in this room, is living and breathing democratic organizing and strategic operations, so we can put an end to this reign of corruption and authoritarianism and get America back on the track of democracy and freedom again. So thank you, David Seaton, for what you're doing. But you know, for those of you, I don't know, how many people here have run for office? Well, I guess all of you to get here, right? Then I salute you. But how many of you have run for public office outside of coming? That's like a lot of people. Well, I'm going to tell you, I want to tell you about that first race, because now I'm getting kind of nostalgic looking at all these brilliant, dazzling young people here. But that first time I ran, when we created Democracy Summer, before it went statewide in Maryland, before we did the Mid-Atlantic, and before we took it national as a while ago. But I was running against a 32-year incumbent who was president pro tem of the Maryland Senate. And I'd never run for office. I was a professor of constitutional law. I was a constitutional law professor for 25 years before I ran for Congress. But we have a part-time legislature, so I ran for the state Senate. But my favorite story about that race is when I first announced, there was an article in the newspaper quoting a pundit who said, Raskin's chances of victory are considered impossible. And then 9 months later, we got 67% of the vote against incumbent. And then the Washington Post had another article about the race, quoting a pundit who said Raskin's victory was inevitable. So we went from impossible to inevitable, because the pundits are never wrong. But what I like to tell the young people in Democracy Summer is, remember this: in politics, nothing's impossible. Nothing is impossible. But also, nothing is inevitable. Nothing is inevitable. It's all only possible through the democratic arts of education, organizing, and mobilizing people for change. Okay? So that day I went out there, it was like 10 below zero when it was like the opposite of today. It was a freezing cold day. And I laid out everything I wanted to do. I said, we're going to abolish the death penalty in Maryland, and we're going to pass marriage equality. This is in 2006 when I first ran. We're going to restore voting rights to the former prisoners, because Maryland had Mississippi and Alabama's law at that point. We're going to pass the first national popular vote interstate compact law in America. We're going to empower ranked choice voting in Maryland across the state. So anyway, I laid out everything that I wanted to do. Oh, this one will be popular. I said, we're going to decriminalize marijuana in Maryland. We're going to do that too. But anyway, I went through this whole speech, and it was freezing, and it was way too long, And this woman came up to me and she said, Jamie, I loved your speech. Great speech. But one thing, she said, take out all that stuff that you've got in there about gay marriage. That's what they called it in those days. You guys weren't born yet, probably, but they called it gay marriage. They said, take out all the stuff you got about gay marriage. It's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. And even the gay candidates don't talk about it. And it makes you sound, check this out, she said, it makes you sound like you're really extreme, like you're not in the political center. And I kind of had to swallow hard there, because first of all, I didn't have that many attendees with me that day when I was running against a 32-year incumbent and kicking off my campaign, never having run for office before. But also my 3 kids were there watching this interaction, and I didn't want to offend her. But what I said was, I really want to thank you for telling me that, because it makes me realize that it's not my ambition to be in the political center, which blows around with the wind. It's my ambition to be in the moral center, to find what's right, and to bring the political center to us. And that's why I'm a Democrat. That's why I'm a Democrat. And that's why I'm proud to be a Democrat. Some of our friends and colleagues across the aisle have a hard time correctly pronouncing the name of our political party in its adjectival form. I don't know if you've noticed that. My friend Lauren Boebert, for example, was on the floor, and she launched into this thing with like that Democrat bill and that Democrat congresswoman and that Democrat party. And I got up and I explained, as I did for 9 years, and I said, Democrat is the noun. Okay, democratic is the adjective. If you're going to sneer at one of my colleagues, you got to say the Democratic congresswoman, and it's a Democratic bill, a Democratic amendment. We're the Democratic Party, But they kept doing it, and like they all got involved, Jim Jordan and Chip Roy and all of them, the Democrat this and the Democrat that, and I lost my temper, And I said, well, you guys have like this bizarre self-imposed political speech impediment on your side. Like, you can't correctly pronounce the name of our party, and it's spreading over to my side. Now when I try to say the name of your political party, it just comes out the Banana Republican Party and the Banana Republican Congressman. And I went home and I told my wife, Sarah, I said, I finally got them back after, because she knew how much this drove me crazy. And I told her the story, and she said, you know what? That was an extremely immature response. Okay. And she said, you're not allowed to do that anymore. And so I said, all right. But luckily I was reading a great book at the time. I recommend highly, about Franklin D. Roosevelt. It's called Traitor to His Class by H.W. Brands, the great historian from Texas. I learned something remarkable in that book. It's got Roosevelt speaking and his speeches and stuff. And Roosevelt did not call our party the Democratic Party, much less the Democrat Party. You know what he called us? With a capital D, at least that's how they transcribe it. He called us the democracy. The democracy, right? So he'd say, well, the economic royalists and the plutocrats say invest in the very wealthiest people in the country. Some of the wealth will dribble down on everybody else. But the democracy says invest in the great American working middle class. We will all rise and prosper together. That's the doctrine of the democracy. So now, when they can't pronounce the name of our party correctly, I say, you know what? Just do what FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt did. Call us the democracy. That's what we are. Because we're not just fighting for the program of the Democrats, like health care for every American who needs it. We're not just fighting for our policy, but we are the party that defends democracy itself. We're the only party in America, major party anyway, that stands up for everybody's right to vote, even if you're not going to vote for us. We will stand up for your right to vote. I've been to like 1,000 Democratic Party meetings. I'm sure you've been to 10,000 Democrat Party meetings. You ever hear somebody say, how are we going to suppress the vote? How are we going to throw people off the voting rolls? How are we going to shut down the electoral process? That's the other guys. We're the democracy. That's who we are. And we stand up for democracy all over the world. We're the ones defending democracy and national sovereignty in Ukraine against Putin's filthy imperialist invasion. We're the ones standing up for democracy and human rights all over the world. That's who we are. That's our assignment. And what are they doing? They're siding with the autocrats, the kleptocrats, the theocrats, the plutocrats. But we're the Democrats, and we're standing up for democracy wherever it's under attack around the world. And guess where it's under attack? Right here in the United States of America. Right here. Our whole Constitution is under attack. These people are constitutional illiterates, and they're savage destroyers of our Constitution. We need to go out and give them a constitutional lesson, starting with the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure to ourselves and our posterity the blessings of liberty, do hereby ordain and establish the Constitution of these United States of America. And the very next sentence is the first sentence of Article 1. And you know what it says? All of that sovereignty that flows into the creation of the country, the writing of our Constitution, all of it flows where? Article 1, first sentence says, all legislative power is vested in a Congress of the United States. All legislative power. We've got the power to declare war, not Donald Trump, not J.D. Vance, not Tulsi Gabbard and their signal chat group. That's not how war gets declared. They don't get to decide to go to war against Iran without coming to Congress. We've got the power to spend money. If we say spend money on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, if we say spend money on the United States Department of Education, protecting the rights of students and civil rights in school, if we say spend money on USAID, promoting anti-hunger, anti-malaria, anti-HIV/AIDS, pro-democracy work all over America, you spend it. You spend it. You don't divert it. You don't impound it. You don't rechannel it. You don't push it somewhere else. That's not within your constitutional authority. We've got the power of the purse in Congress, and we've got the power to tax. Donald Trump imposed the greatest tax in American history, a unilaterally imposed tariff on our allies all over the world, lifting them one day, decreasing them the next day, going up 50%, 80%, no rhyme or reason, no legislation behind it. It was so bad, even his stacked and packed and gerrymandered Roberts Court had to strike it down. So you get through all of that stuff, the power to regulate commerce, domestically and internationally, intellectual property, piracy, you name it, you get through all that, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, and all other powers necessary and proper to the execution of the foregoing powers Congress has. Then you get to Article 2. It's like this big. The key sentence in it says, a president shall be removed from office upon impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Sometimes my colleagues, even my beloved Nancy Pelosi, sometimes falls into the trap. They'll get up and they'll say, oh, you know, Mr. President, you can't do this or that. We're three co-equal branches. Okay, now I want to teach you something here. Forgive me if I'm sounding a little didactic and professorial, but I was a professor for 25 years. My friends, first of all, co-equal is not even a word, okay? So purge that from your vocabulary. Secondly, if we're co-equal, why do we have the power to impeach, try, convict, remove, and disqualify for life the president, and he doesn't have the power to impeach, try, convict, remove, and disqualify us? The framers of the Constitution were terrified by kings and what they were doing in terms of plundering the public treasury, going to war on a whim, on trips for imperial plunder and avarice and whimsy. They knew what kings would do, and they were afraid of power generally, but they had a lot more faith in the representatives of the people than they did in what one president drunk on power and potentially mad might do. So, we need to restore and reclaim the preeminence of Congress, the representatives of the people in America. Article 3 of the Constitution establishes, as Chief Justice Marshall put it in Marbury versus Madison, it's emphatically the province and the duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. And you know who's been doing a great job is the federal district judges and the federal appeals court judges, which have struck down the vast majority of all of the lawlessness coming out of the White House, like the executive order purporting to negate the very first sentence of the 14th Amendment, which says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. And every single federal district court to look at it struck it down and castigated and reprimanded President Trump and the executive branch for trying to destroy birthright citizenship in America. And then it goes to the Supreme Court, and thank God there's at least 5 justices who are willing to read the Constitution, right? But 4 of them said, no, you can totally strip people of their citizenship by law. We're hanging on by a thread there. It gets up into the twilight zone of the shadow docket, and then anything can happen. It's like forks and spoons and knives are just flying around the room. Anything can happen. All the laws are suspended up there. We have got to restore the Supreme Court as a guardian of the rights of the people again. So, let me just say a word about our rights and our freedoms, because that's what the whole Constitution is about. All of the separation of powers and then the elucidation of the rights in the Bill of Rights. It's all about defending the rights and the freedoms of the people against power-mad authoritarians and autocrats that would try to crush our freedom. But our freedoms are under attack today. The freedom of speech is under attack. Ask the families of Alex Preddy and Renee Good, shot down in broad daylight in cold blood just for exercising their freedom of speech. We must restore the freedom of speech in America. The freedom of press. Donald Trump is deciding that he is going to be the decider of who gets to run the networks. If you say good stuff about Donald Trump, you're going to get a license. If you're not, we're going to take your license away. I think he threatened to take the licenses away last night against the networks who made their private editorial decision not to cover his insane diatribe full of drivel last night. That they were exercising their First Amendment right. They probably did him a favor. The other networks should sue him if they made the mistake of running that blathering by him. But we're getting a constant attack on the freedom of press. The separation of church and state. You saw that they just issued, his Trump's Commission on Religious Liberty just issued their big report. And in that report, they attack the idea of the separation of church and state. They said that separation of church and state doesn't exist. The words don't exist in the First Amendment. You know what else doesn't exist in the First Amendment? Christian white nationalism doesn't appear in the First Amendment either. And yet, you know what is in? You know what's in the First Amendment? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And there shall be no religious tests for public office in Article 6 of the Constitution. And yet, it doesn't end with these people. One of my colleagues got up. He said, the moral downfall of America was in Engel versus Vitale in 1962 when the Supreme Court banned prayer in the public schools. And I got up to say, you know what? The Supreme Court never banned prayer in the public schools. As long as there are pop math quizzes, there will be prayer in the public schools. Anybody can pray whenever he or she wants to pray. It's just the government cannot compose a religious script and compel your children to participate in it. But you saw Texas and Louisiana, their legislatures voted to endorse the Ten Commandments and post the Ten Commandments in every classroom. And the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld that. That's going to go to the Supreme Court. Very big case. But I knew what would happen. My MAGA colleagues show up and they say, we should endorse the Ten Commandments. We should post the Ten Commandments in all the federal buildings. And I was like, gee, the Ten Commandments have been doing fine for millennia without an endorsement by the U.S. House of Representatives and the Freedom Caucus. No, one guy says to me, he kind of tricked me there for a minute. I was confused. He said, you know that the Ten Commandments are the basis for the Bill of Rights, don't you? And I was like, well, I know there's 10 in each one. That's true. But let's test the proposition. The first commandment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That's the First Amendment. And the first commandment says, thou shalt have no other God before me. I'm not quite sure what those two things have to do with each other. But we go to the Rules Committee, and they want a rule on the House floor that we should have an up or down vote on the Ten Commandments. And I said, no, I've got a different idea. If we're actually going to vote on the Ten Commandments, we're not going to let you get away with that omnibus package. We should have to vote on each commandment separately, okay? And you can't vote for any commandment you yourself have ever violated, okay? So we got the Republicans to back off on that one. Due process is under attack. Everybody knows that. One of my Republican colleagues said when we were debating it, well, you're not for due process for guilty people, are you? I'm like, that's the whole point, okay? We don't know if they're guilty until there's been due process. The two most beautiful words in the Constitution, I guess rivaled by equal protection, due process. So, my friends, look, I don't envy the job you've got ahead of you, because you're facing things like I didn't even know about when I was your age, like climate change and like the rise of authoritarianism and fascism and anti-Semitism and racism all over the world. You're facing that. And artificial intelligence, a million questions about that. And crypto, a million questions about that. But you get to wake up every day and go out and fight for everything you believe in and try to solve the answers, get the answers to solve these problems. I'm going to leave you, great college Democrats, with the words of two of the democracy patriots I've held close to my heart through this dark period. One, the great Marylander Frederick Douglass, who was born 45 minutes away from here at the Wye River Plantation into slavery. He escaped from slavery to become our great freedom fighter through the Civil War, through Reconstruction. And Douglass said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. And the struggle may be moral, it may be physical, it may be moral and physical, but there must be struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. A message to you from the great Frederick Douglass and the people of Maryland. And I'll leave you finally with the words of Tom Paine, who our son Tommy was named after. And Tom Paine got to America in 1774, 2 years before the Revolution. He fell in love with our land and our people. And he said, if this country lives up to its promise, its ideals, and its values, he said it will become an asylum to humanity. Not an insane asylum, mind you, but a place of refuge for people seeking freedom from religious and political and intellectual repression all over the world. And then he wrote the greatest pamphlet of our history, Common Sense. Common sense, by which he meant the sense you have even if you didn't get to go to Oxford or Cambridge or Princeton or what have you, and the sense we have in common when we reason together, speak together, and listen soulfully to each other. Common sense. And, you know, George Washington had the troops at Valley Forge reading from Common Sense by campfire light every night. But 1776 was a tough year. A tough year. And he wrote Common Sense in January, but in December, it was the winter of our discontent, and people didn't know which way things were going to go. The country was split right down the middle. My man H.W. Brands wrote a book about it called The First Civil War, about how the American Revolution was like a civil war because it split the country in half. Half of the people were running around saying, you cannot beat the kings and the queens, you cannot disentangle church and state, you cannot overthrow feudalism, you cannot beat the greatest military empire that ever existed. It's hopeless, they were saying. And the other half of the people were saying, let's give it a try. Let's try to put government on the principle of the consent of the governed, as Jefferson put it in the Declaration, on the idea of unalienable rights and freedoms of the people, and everybody being created equal. Let's try democracy and freedom and equality. Let's pledge to each other our lives, our property, our sacred honor in order to make it happen. Because for all of history, humanity suffered under a system where the rulers were always like King George or Vladimir Putin or Donald Trump. That's not some exceptional, aberrational thing. That's the way societies have always worked. What makes America special is we rejected that. And we said we wanted to build government based on freedom and democracy and equality. But anyway, my friends, I'm going to leave you with the words of Tom Paine in this other pamphlet that he wrote. in December called The American Crisis. And I'm going to update the language a little bit so as not to offend modern sensibilities. Pelosi makes me do that. She said Paine was a feminist and he wouldn't mind. And he was fighting for women's voting rights in the 18th century. But he said this, he said, "These are the times that try men and women's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink at this moment from the service of their cause and their country. But everyone that stands with us now will win the love and the favor and the affection of every man and every woman for all time. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this saving consolation. The more difficult the struggle, the more glorious in the end will be our victory. Let's make that victory ours, college Democrats of America." Thank you very much.